Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of Thought Leaders. I'm your host, Chris Shang, and today we have Liam Martin, who is the co-founder of Time Doctor. He's also an author and runs a conference called Running Remote. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me. Very excited to be able to be here.
Yeah, man. So you are a remote work expert, and why don't you tell us a little bit about what that means in terms of like the conference, you as an expert, the thought leadership and the talks that you give, as well as the SaaS company.
Yeah, I mean, that used to be a really uncool thing for
Yeah.
COVID. Then it got really cool. And now kind of it's uncool again with the recent stuff that we just saw with Amazon basically telling everybody to go back to work full time. But essentially, I run a couple companies. So timedoctor.com, which is a time tracking tool for remote teams. We've been operating that business for about 14 years. And then also Running Remote, which is our just conference on remote work. And we have team members in 46 different countries all over the world. And our mission is that we want to try to empower the world's transition towards remote work. And we were doing that before COVID. Obviously, it got more exciting after COVID. And now we're kind of just dealing with, I would probably say, the third epoch of remote work, which is, to me, the most exciting epoch of remote work so far.
Very cool. Before we kind of like dive into all of that, which is a lot to unpack, I think, would love to kind of just to get a little bit of understanding around your background. So like I've seen you've been in research, you've been in teaching, before you got into entrepreneurship. Can you talk us through what like maybe that previous chapter of your career might have looked like, and before you actually became a founder?
Sure. I'm trying to find my master's degree. It's somewhere in this office because I just moved offices. But I used to be an academic and I was pursuing my PhD specifically in sociology of work. And I remember this so clearly. I started teaching classes because if you're an undergrad, or if you're an undergrad, you probably don't know this, but most first and second year
Yeah.
classes are actually taught by graduate students. They're not taught by professors. And so started the class with 300 students. By the end of the semester, I ended up with less than 150 in the worst academic reviews in the history of the department, and the department had been running for 186 years. So very, very bad. I remember walking into my supervisor's office and I said, I don't think I'm very good at this. And he said, no, you are not. And I said, okay, so what do you think I should do next? And he said, well, you got to get pretty good at this teaching thing or figure something else out to do. 6 weeks later, I threw a master's thesis under his door and I was out into the real world. And that's actually where I started my very first business, which was a online tutoring company. And this was way back in like 2008, 2009, when we were doing everything on Skype, if people remember back to the old days of Skype. And the internet worked kind of like half the time, but I realized that I could actually scale that business really effectively by having tutors online as opposed to having them in a physical space. And so the problem that I had with that business is I couldn't actually equate the amount of hours that a tutor worked with a student. And this was creating a big problem because I end up having to pay the tutor the full 10 hours, but then I'd have to refund 5 or 6 hours for the student who said, I didn't work with my tutor for 10 hours, I worked with him for 5. This was really destroying the business. And then I ended up joining my co-founder, Rob, who is the CEO of the company, for Time Doctor, that specifically solved that problem to allow for you to measure how many hours a remote worker is working inside of your company.
Got it. Interesting. What was it like? You started the online tutor business before you met your co-founder. What were some of the, from going from like an online tutor business, which is, still more of a scalable format, but just kind of like coming to those epiphanies and those realizations. And then where, yeah, probably you weren't thinking about like wearing a founder hat or like maybe necessarily even thinking yourself at that time as a true entrepreneur, maybe, but it was more so of like building out this business and then you found opportunities. But I would imagine going from that to then like having a co-founder, starting Time Doctor, that's more of a conscientious effort into that entrepreneurial journey. Um,
Yeah,
walk me through what that might have looked like, and what was the evolution in terms of like the knowledge base that you learned as you started like upskilling yourself into like this very like much more defined entrepreneurial business.
sure. So I don't think that entrepreneurship can be taught. I think that entrepreneurs are not bred, they're built from
Yeah.
the get-go like that. And actually, the first few years of my young life was really the battle with me coming out of the closet as an entrepreneur.
Mm,
A lot of my parents wanted me to finish my PhD. A lot of my extended family wanted me to do that. But I realized that I just couldn't deal with that type of a system. And I think that entrepreneurship, to me, the best definition of it is you're either enslaved by someone else's system or you enslave others. And so I'd rather be on the enslaving side than be enslaved. And my perspective was, how can I actually build my own way of putting food into my mouth and in my family's table, on my family's table. I would probably say for me, the biggest realization that I had connected to that was when I started that particular business, and I was just way happier. I was making way less money
Yeah,
than I had been making before, but I was happier. And so following what makes you happy and what you're passionate about is, and I also don't tell people don't blindly follow your passion. So if you're a fantastic,
sure.
accountant right now, don't go start a restaurant somewhere. That's actually a horrible mistake, but maybe build something in between those two things that you can build that passion for. And really for me, with the tutoring company and a bunch of other businesses that we built over that time, I'm really scratching my own itch. So just really pursuing stuff that I'm truly passionate about, running remote, which is the conference that we have been running now for almost 8 years, specifically on remote work. It just comes from my passion. I love remote work and I love talking with founders connected to remote work. And so because of that, we built that conference. And I think that fundamentally people can see that. I think that if you're building a business to just make money, it's probably not going to work out for you. But if you're building a business to solve a problem, you will succeed eventually.
Yeah, I mean, I love when you say scratching your own itch, right? And I think in one of these other interviews, we had a discussion around passion versus curiosity. I feel like sometimes curiosity might be a more impactful word for like people who are applying for
Yeah,
business
that's
because
great.
passion can kind of fizzle out, right? Versus curiosity is the thing that you end up like waking up and going like deep down the rabbit hole, or like staying up late at night going down that rabbit hole because you just are continuously trying to fill that itch. And like for you, I can kind of like, see the timeline of that journey of like why remote work intrinsically from maybe like a socially and psychological like perspective can be super interesting based on the background that you had in terms of like building up that the tutoring business, and then realizing, okay, with remote that allows scalability, that allows to like access a wider pool of talent that is not limited to geography as that restriction, which it was historically. And even still
Mhm.
now, I think like that's probably one of the biggest advantages of remote work too, is like the ability to kind of like have an access to a pool of talent that is global versus restrictive to geography. But I'm more curious about your thoughts on that in terms of, you know, the not now necessarily in terms of what you understand the pros and cons of remote, but like when you first started getting into it, what was the draw for you? What was the excitement for you? And obviously, granted, it was a completely different time, but
Yeah, so I can very clearly define that. It was freedom and flexibility. So it was the ability to be able to work wherever you want, whenever you want, which is actually the tagline of our conference. And we just knew, me and my co-founder, Rob, we recognized that we didn't want to be stuck in an office
yeah,
all day long. And that wasn't really the way that we wanted to be able to build a business. And we were fully prepared to have a smaller business in exchange for that level of freedom. I remember when we started Time Doctor, maybe we were like 3 or 4 years in, and we ended up getting term sheets from a whole bunch of different companies because we are bootstrapped and we've never taken any equity off the table. So everything is ours, which is also another huge advantage of being bootstrapped.
yeah,
And every single term sheet that we got when we were thinking about raising money was, well, you've got to bring everyone to Toronto, New York, San Francisco, Montreal. You can't actually keep a distributed team. And we said, but our mission is to empower the world's transition towards remote work. Don't you think that that's kind of like counterintuitive? Fundamentally, they're like, listen, we're venture capitalists. Trust us. We love your mission. We love what you're doing. Traction is great, but you got to bring everyone into the office. And they were just fundamentally wrong on that thesis because VCs are generally just, they're looking for signal,
yeah, of
right?
course.
So they're just looking for, okay, what numbers work? What are the right pieces that they've seen historically? So innovation is very, very difficult to get in any particular industry, but particularly in venture backed companies. And we just realized that we wanted that freedom. And We also built and found a community of fantastic remote founders that had that same passion as well. And a lot of these guys, by the way, are not digital nomads. I don't know for your audience whether or not they would know that. Those are people like travel around the world and work from their laptops full time, which there's been a lot more of them after COVID. But the vast majority of remote founders actually just stay in one single location. I am in my walk-in closet in Montreal, Canada, and I love my lifestyle, but I stay primarily in one particular location and I don't interact with any of the employees. We actually have a two or three, one of them is 3 blocks away, and I think I see him twice a year as an example, because we just have more freedom to be able to work in that way. And that's what we love. And it's continued on even today, post COVID.
Absolutely. Um, I'm curious as to your thoughts. I know you mentioned the Amazon situation of like kind of bringing everybody in. I feel like you tell me first before I kind of like go into this realm, but like does remote work for every kind of company, or can it work for every kind of company, or does it work better for certain types of companies? And that could be relegated to like size, industry, a specific vertical, for example. Yeah, I'm just curious to your thoughts on that.
So Deloitte's got some really good, a bunch of companies have done great research on this. And that's the cool thing about remote work now is academia is now doing a ton of
Yeah.
research. And because it takes 3 to 5 years for that data to come out, there's now a huge wave of data that's coming through. So Deloitte did a really great study, and it found that in the United States, the salinity point for remote work was 86%. So
Hmm.
86% of all workers in the United States could work remotely if they chose to.
Yep.
So that's our absolute top, right? So we've got about 15% essentially that just can't do it. A bus driver, someone
Yep.
that works at Zara, or someone that works at McDonald's, you just can't, those people can't work remotely. But out of that, we actually during COVID, we hit a peak of 67%. So pre-COVID, we were at 4.5% of the US workforce working remotely. And within 2 months, we were at 67% of the US workforce working remotely. That is the biggest shift in work since the Industrial Revolution. But the Industrial Revolution took about 80 years, and we did that in March. So it
Mhm.
completely changed everything that we understood about remote work. But Pandora's box was opened during that time. Everyone got a taste of remote work. And what we're seeing now is we're seeing a bunch of the media talking about the return to the office. I don't know what your thoughts are, Chris, but do you think that remote work is going up or down as a rate, just
Right.
based off your perception? Yeah.
I mean, perception, I would say there's a hybrid, I think a hybrid model that's happening where I know if I'm pulling from like specific use cases of like people that I know, like people at
Mm-hmm.
like Apple, or like my sister who works at like Citigroup and things like that, like they are trying to make it mandatory for you to come in like a minimal amount of days per week, like 2 to 3 days per week. There's definitely pushback from employees. I don't know if even if when Amazon's saying like coming back to the office, what that actually means, if that's like 5 days a week or if it's like a portion of the week. But I see more of that hybrid model, I guess, coming across
Okay.
because of employees pushing back around like the full 5 days. Even
So
that's even like wanting that.
would you say that those numbers are essentially going down? That's your perception in the media?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah,
Okay.
but I would imagine it's also, I don't know. I could see it like in different places going down and different places going up. And it
Yeah,
depends
no,
on
it's
which
it,
industries are growing more.
so it's super interesting data, and I have all the data sets literally in front of me that I follow on a weekly basis. So survey for working arrangements and attitudes, and the Census for Household Pulse survey, plus the Castle Systems back to work barometer. I look at all these three data sets and then we correlate them all. They all have said that remote work for the last 2.5 years has been rock solid at 28.2%.
Oh, wow.
So it has not changed
Yeah.
at all. And there's this perception in the media that everyone's going back to the office, but there's one, and the most interesting data set, if you want to go like hyper nerdy on this stuff, I suggest that you Google it. The Castle Systems Back to Work Barometer is actually a data set that's built by a commercial real estate company. So obviously they don't want they want that number to go back to exactly where it was. And that data set shows that we're 48.7% back from pre-COVID levels, meaning half of people are actually working either remotely or hybrid. And the way that they collect that data is they actually look at the use of public transportation systems in 15 of the top cities in the United States to really see like who is going to work during those times. So really interesting data. And then when you look at that perception of the media, it's a completely different narrative. And there's a couple of reasons for that. I could guarantee to you with Amazon, well, I don't want to guarantee anything. I could almost guarantee with you. I bet you $1,000 1 year from now that Amazon will also be announcing some layoffs relatively soon. And this is a really good way to get people to leave the company without actually taking an exit package. We saw exactly the same thing with Dell about 6 weeks ago. They actually let go of 12,500 employees. And Dell, that has over 100,000 employees, half their org was permanently remote. And they went to that half of the org and they said, listen, we need you to all come back to the office 3 days per week. And they said no, overwhelmingly. And they said, listen, if you do not go back, you will get no raises and you will not rise throughout the org. And they said, bet 90% of them said they were totally fine with not being paid more because remote work was that important to them. So we're now seeing this big conflict between employers and employees. And fundamentally, I think that we're going to see that tension continue through 2025. But if I had to kind of give you my perspective of where remote work will be, I think we'll probably be, we're at about 28, 29% right now. I think that will be approximately 40% by 2030. So that number is going to go back up because people, even now, when you look at brand new companies that are getting started, so if you're listening to this and you have a small business or you just started your tech startup, 82% of YC companies are being started remotely.
Yeah.
So it's completely shifted.
Yeah, that doesn't surprise me at all. So that's why I was saying is like, I think like definitely like a lot of these younger companies are thinking more remote, but then the more mature companies, the more mature companies thinking more of like bringing them back? You just mentioned a very interesting point, which is like, this is a good way for them to preempt layoffs before actually doing it. But I'm curious as to what are they saying forward facing, these large companies like Amazon, like what are they collectively saying forward facing as the reason for bringing people back into the office, and versus like what you think behind the scenes of it actually the meaning is, what you kind of alluded to with the preempting of the layoffs.
Yeah. So the big argument is it's all about collaboration and it's about in-person collaboration. I don't know if you had seen just last month the big trending article that there was a Wells Fargo employee that was found dead in her cubicle 4 days after clocking in
I saw that
because no one actually, I mean, how's collaboration going for her?
Yeah.
Not very well. I would probably say right now, when you look at there's these new terms that have really just popped up. And again, this is why I find that third epoch of remote work so interesting. And I just heard about this last month, hushed hybrid. So there are middle managers that recognize that remote work is great for their employees' productivity, which, by the way, 98% of all studies that I've seen have shown that remote work is more productive for workers and better for their mental well-being. It's definitive. It's like climate change definitive. And so when you look at that metric, those middle managers think to themselves, okay, do I actually want my employees to be happy and successful and productive or not? Listen, I'm just going to keep all of your swipe cards at my desk and I'm going to clock you in. You can stay at home. And this is happening en masse. So it's really interesting to look at the Castle Systems Back to Work Barometer, which actually shows you the usage of people driving to work versus other data sets that show swiping. So it's like these interesting phenomenons to show that there's a whole bunch of people that are just basically, there's also another term is called coffee badging. So essentially you come in, you drink a coffee, you swipe in, and then you just disappear and you come back the next morning to be able to swipe in, and you just basically go back to your home to be able to work from home. So all of this stuff is happening. And I think over the next kind of 9 to 18 months, we're probably going to see a lot of this data get a lot clearer. But as I said before, I'm projecting 40% by 2030.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah, I'm not, I guess like, so I was holding this piece of information real quick, but like I was up in the Bay Area last week and met up with a close friend of mine who works at Apple. And one of the biggest complaints for him is just like everything's so slow, even though he's going into the office and he's like a project manager, like one of the web project managers. He's like, I can do what I'm doing there in like 10 hours a week. And
Mhm.
this idea of like going back into the office is one of the biggest frustrating points for him because of that lack of like the lack of effectiveness, efficiency, and productivity, even though they want to be more productive. And it's counterintuitive to what the infrastructure within the organization actually looks like. So I guess it's like, I'm not exactly sure what the argument is for these companies to start doing that when the data is fighting against it, the employees are fighting against it, the outcomes are fighting against it.
Okay, so I'll give you another example.
Yeah.
If anyone wants to Google 995 Market Street in San Francisco,
Okay.
okay, just put that into Google right now.
I'm gonna do
Beautiful
it.
building. It's about 60 stories. It's one of the largest buildings in San Francisco. It has a big WeWork in it.
Yeah.
It sold for $62 million in 2016. And last week it sold for $6.5 million.
Oh, wow.
AT&T Center in St. Louis. It is the tallest building in St. Louis. It was valued at 205 million in 2006. Last month it sold for 3.5 million, a 98.3% drop in value. When you look at why this is happening, and I don't want to necessarily get too conspiratorial for people, but
For sure, sure.
put
I
on your
love
tinfoil hat for a second.
I love getting conspiratorial, but
So when you look at who controls
yeah,
commercial real estate, it has been probably in the last 100 years the single best tool for ultra high net worth institutions and
that makes
individuals
sense. That makes sense.
to transfer their wealth over to the next generation. It is the bluest of blue chip stocks. What's better than office buildings? And office buildings, by the way, they only grow at 5%, right? 5-6% in terms of a return. But the reality is there's so many tax write-offs, and corporate real estate is the only form of real estate that is non-collateralized.
Hmm.
So when you go and buy a house, you got to put 10, 20% down. If you're an entrepreneur, you got to put 20% down on your house, right? Because you're a risk.
Yeah.
And then you pay that back over 25 years. With a commercial building, if I want to go out and buy a $100 million building, you don't have to put down anything. You just say, here's my business plan. I want to buy this $100 million building. It's a 5-year term. Maybe you pay off 10 of that $100 million term over 5 years. But in that 10 years, it appreciated to $150 million. You go back to the bank and you say, this building's worth $150 million. Do you agree, bank? Yes, I do. Can I take $30 million out in equity? Of course you can. That's the way that game is played. It is a continuous system where the point of office buildings are never to be paid off. They are an asset class that basically large institutions use to be able to pad out the rest of the portfolio. Blackstone is 57% of their portfolio is corporate real estate.
Yeah.
Get the hell out of Blackstone if you possibly can, because we're realizing that there's this disconnection between those two sources. And
Yeah.
so there's this huge perception in the media that everyone's going back to the office. And when I look at who's behind the vast majority of those articles, you usually find
Mm,
banks, you
mm,
find
yeah.
investment firms, you find insurance companies, asset managers, essentially very, very, very rich people, which I am one of those people, by the way. I, I'm not saying rich people are bad. I'm just saying let's look at reality here. It's a $4.2 trillion asset class that's probably worth $2 trillion right now. And we just need to be able to readjust to it. But if these were houses, they would be devalued instantly because people own them. But because the most powerful institutions in the world control these assets, they're not going to get devalued.
Interesting. How is it going? I guess, I mean, a lot of things start running through my head, which is with that drop of value on the open market, it seems like this is like a bubble waiting to burst or some kind of implosion is going to happen at some point in time. Um,
I've
I,
thought it's going to blow in the last 18 months,
yeah,
and it
interesting.
hasn't. And
Yeah,
and so, but when I look at the institutions, so biggest single owner of commercial real estate is at 57% of all commercial real estate in the United States is banks.
yeah, yeah.
Why would a bank ever want
Not
to
really.
devalue
Yeah,
its biggest asset. It
yeah,
will be left. And by the way, banks, these commercial buildings are non-collateralized.
yep,
So if I own $100 million building and I don't want to rent it anymore, I go back to the bank and I say, hey, guys, I've had enough. Here are the keys. Have fun.
yeah,
Nothing happens to me. I can just walk away. Right. And so when you look at that and you look at the implications of it, it's not surprising to me. And these assets may never be devalued. I'm really confused as to why it hasn't happened yet, to be honest with you. It's much like the stock market. When you look at it from a grandiose perspective, you know something's going to go down. Like we know that there's going to be a correction in the market, right? We're September 18th, 2024. Everything's flashing red, but everything's been flashing red for the past 6 months.
yeah.
So we know there's going to be a correction. I don't know if it's going to happen tomorrow. I don't know if it's going to happen in 6 months, in 12 months, but it's definitely going to happen. I see exactly the same thing with commercial real estate.
Yeah, interesting. I mean, it seems like for right now, it's just being inflated to a certain degree with through media, through these companies, and they're just kind of like holding on for dear life in the hopes that,
Everyone goes back to the
everybody
office.
goes back to the office. But like, if you're not, if everybody else is fighting against it, it's just a time. It's just time. You're just fighting time and the
Well,
inevitability
and
of that.
and the other part, the big argument that everyone makes is, well, why don't we just actually redefine these commercial properties as residential? Why don't we
Yeah,
transition them from commercial to residential?
yeah,
Uh, the average square footage of commercial produces 4 times the property tax of the average square foot of residential. Cities run on commercial property tax.
yeah,
It's like 60% of their budget. So all of a sudden, if you go from 60 to 20%, if you lose 40% of your budget, right? If LA loses 40% of their
yeah,
budget,
yeah.
they're screwed. They're screwed. They cannot make that transition. The math does not work. So everyone needs to continue to get paid in order for this system to function properly. And we just have to unravel essentially an institution, an asset class that we've been building over the last 100 years as the bluest of blue chips. And it's problematic because it's a fundamental building block of the Western economy.
Hot damn. That's like a huge thing. This is like big stuff that, I feel like, yeah, it's just something that's like it's a snowball effect that's just rolling and rolling and just getting larger and larger. And
So I have
we're
a
at the
couple
big
really
time
big
of the
predictions in the next 12 months. Number one, we're probably going to see devaluation of commercial real estate. Again, I said that last year and I was wrong. I've been thinking about this for the past 18 months. So
double
maybe I'm
down.
wrong on there, but it's going to happen. It's
Yep.
got to happen. Number two, the scarlet letter will be very clearly placed upon remote workers. We are not going to be anyone's friend in the next 12 to 18 months because people are going to say remote workers are the ones that destroyed essentially the largest block of the economy because commercial real estate is actually 2.5 times the size of the entire residential real estate market. And in 2008, that was bad. Commercial real estate is much bigger. So when you look at all of those pieces, it's going to be pretty bad, and remote workers are going to be the people that get in trouble. But then I think we're going to come out the other side with probably much more sustainable um, city budgets, municipalities. And I think we're also going to probably have a group of people that are going to really start to get back to like small town, rural
Yeah.
environments. I would say the best place that you could possibly live, and I live in Montreal, Canada, by the way. It's very expensive from a tax perspective, but it's very, very cheap, generally because there's a language issue and there's like a conflict between Anglophone and Francophone people. And because of that, no Anglophones actually want to come here, which is great. Don't come here. It sucks. But that is a beautiful system for me because I have an international airport that's 15 minutes away from me. I can basically do what I want. I have a chalet that's about an hour and a half north of where I currently live. So I can live a very sustainable lifestyle where I can get access to international travel, There's 3 international universities inside of this city. It's a really good system. So any city that has international airport and at least one international university is probably the best place that you could possibly find, and the smallest population humanly possible. So like if you could get into a town or a city of 100,000 people that has a world-class university and a really great airport, that is great. Boulder, Colorado,
Yep.
perfect example of those types of locations. They will survive and they will thrive in
Mm,
this new economy because they will be attracting amazing top tier talent that does not impact the labor pool whatsoever. They will literally be sucking dollars from outside of that municipality and that state and that country, even, and injecting it inside of the local economy. So if you're a mayor of a city right now, that's how I would start to structure your economy. And there's a terminology being thrown around by economists called the urban doom loop. And it is literally that scary, which is basically commercial real estate is going down in value, which means that city budgets need to be cut, which means that you have to go get that revenue somewhere else. You get it from residents. Residents don't like that. So therefore, they end up working remotely and they leave those urban environments. So this is that feedback loop that's starting to happen right now. And it's accelerating. It's not decelerating. So we're probably going to see some really wild stuff over the next 12 months, in my opinion.
damn. That's like on top of all the AI stuff that I've been talking to other people about that's happening in the next like year or 2 years too, which is like,
Well, and yeah, I mean, I think we've got a really interesting phenomenon right now where we've got and if we want to go full kind of conspiratorial, we can do that. We've got the printing money situation that we had during COVID that's pushing all of these valuations up to a ridiculous amount. You've got remote work where everyone now knows that they can work better when they work from home, but that's counter to what corporate interests want because they want to be able to make sure that the backbone of their portfolios are still operational. And then on top of all of that, you've got artificial intelligence that is going to probably disrupt not your average contact center rep, because we have a lot of contact center reps inside of Time Doctor, as an example, as a customer base. And when you look at those jobs, those are $20 an hour jobs. Those are probably not going first. You know who I would take out first? Lawyers, doctors, accountants, people that are paid $1,000 an hour. And LLMs can do that work very quickly and easily. In some cases, much better than replacing an actual, customer support agent that's picking up the phone and calling people. So I actually think those are the people that AI is going to come after first, not the hyper white collar, the high end white collar jobs, not necessarily your low end white collar or blue collar jobs. I think those will actually be fine for the next 5 to 10 years.
yeah, interesting. Well, on that note, I want to say thank you so much for taking your time and sharing a lot of your insights. And a lot of this, like, I love this like freakonomics effect of like just starting off from remote work and couldn't have gotten somebody who's better at it and to speak about it than you, who's been in this for over 10 years, pre-pandemic, post-pandemic, and then, kind of like what the effects of it and what the reality is currently, and then what it could potentially lead into in the near future. So thank you so much for sharing.
Yeah, thanks for having me. And in a year, we could come back and find out whether or not I'm right.
Love to do that.